Hey, Dalton, great to be here.
Yes, sir. It's nice to have you on my show. I was on your show. Um, we got to talk about podcasting, a little bit like sales, right? Um, and I really enjoyed your show. Do you still have a podcast? Do you still work on that or what?
Not really. It's actually probably one of my greatest tragedies of path of least resistance to the, quickest, bonuses from building relationships and learning.
Yeah.
I think we learn most from podcast hosting. If you do it right, you learn a lot.
Yeah, dude, I've been doing this for like almost 5 years, and I have friends who've done it for like longer. But um, the whenever somebody asks me about podcasting, I'm like, it's a networking tool, man. Like it's cool to have really cool conversations, and I've learned a lot. Like I got to interview last night one of my really good friends. Her name was Jen Drummond, just on mindset too.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's
she's great, dude.
good. She's good. Oh
Yeah,
man, Jen, I love her story.
yeah, dude.
Yeah, she's got a great story.
She's
It's a good
almost
one.
done with. She's almost done with her second world her second world record.
Hey, once you get one, why stop?
Yeah,
Why
dude. Well,
stop at one?
well, her story was really interesting, and I don't want to take too much time talking about her episode because I got you here, but she did the 7 second summits, and there was some debacle. There was some debate on because it's the seven highest summits in every continent, and there's some debates on two different like continents, right? So like, is Indonesia part of um, Asia or is it part of Australia? And so in some parts of the world, it's part of Australia. So she had to climb that mountain. And then she had to climb another one in Russia because there was also some dispute of like Russia and Europe or whatever. And so then she was only like three mountains away from climbing all the second highest and the first highest. So she's
Oh
got like two more
wow,
mountains and she'll finish it. So it's really cool. But yeah, talk about
that's
growth, dude.
exciting.
Yeah, man. But dude,
Yeah, and she's got kids, and
do you
she's
know
got a whole family.
Do you know how many? Do you know how many she has?
I know she has a handful.
It's like
She has a few.
seven.
I
Seven.
think, yeah, yeah.
Jeez, dude.
So I
Oh
haven't
my
spoken to
gosh.
her for a minute, but when she was
Yeah.
going to be launching her book and all that stuff, we got introduced, got to meet her. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, she's awesome, man.
Yeah.
There's a story for everybody. Like that's what's so powerful about stories is like there's a story for everybody, and there's many stories for every person.
Hmm.
And if we can find those stories and connect to those stories, it's just breathtaking. What you can internally transform.
Oh,
It's wild.
oh yeah, man. And not only that, but like the story that you have is part of your mindset. Like how you define your story, how you tell yourself that story, how you tell your story to others really is a pivotal change in your mindset. And you've got an incredible story. Just I mean business. I mean your life, but business by itself, like um, lots of adversity. You're like living abroad. You're not even in America right now. Yeah, were
Yeah.
you at Vietnam right now?
Yeah, I'm in Malaysia right now doing a
Malaysia,
visa run.
dude.
Um, but even the moving out of the United States is it's like a part of a mindset as well too. It's picking and
Interesting.
choosing your battles. It's picking and choosing your battles and being aware enough to understand the resistances that are preventing you from making specific
Yeah,
progressions in life. And
yeah,
God, if you're biblical, whatever your belief is, the land of unbelief is a real thing. And
mm,
so it is so important, and this is biblically written, to
yeah,
leave where you are and to go somewhere else where nobody knows you. Because yeah, it's I guess it has to do with the whole average of the five. If you're in a whole place where like you're known as this, it's harder to become this.
yeah,
And so there's multiple stories in the Bible, even Jesus not being able to perform miracles in his hometown
yeah,
because people didn't believe that he could perform miracles because in their minds all he was a carpenter.
yeah.
And so there's a lot of power in that as well too. Even just as simple as like Grant Cardone always saying like leave your hometown, leave this, go somewhere else. Put it all on the line. Like
Yeah.
it goes a lot deeper than that. It actually goes biblical.
Well, no, that's true, dude. It's funny that you say that because I grew up in the Midwest where like sales and business like wasn't like a big thing to talk about, and so yeah, I came to Utah because that's where I could thrive, and then I'll get calls from my hometown of like, hey dude, you're like doing good in business, like help me with this, or like what do you see here? And it's like funny, you kind of have to leave, and you don't know what you have till it's gone, kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Well, and that's also true. It's also very interesting because when you talk about like um Jesus doing miracles or whatever, and it doesn't if people like, that's the story that they told themselves, was like, dude, that could happen. You know what I mean? It's like how you justify things, and the story that you tell yourself about what happened. It can be
Oh
a
yeah.
miracle and a blessing, or it can be, and so, when I'm talking with people sometimes, I think the best book I ever read around mindset was The Happiness Advantage. Have you ever read that book?
I
Okay, it's a
haven't, but
really
it
good
sounds good.
it's a good book, and it's not super fluffy because I'm not into like the toxic positivity stuff, if it's raining, it's sunning or whatever. But
Yeah.
he talked about just looking for good things. And it was that principle of like, if I tell you to look at white cars on the street, you're going to be like, wow, there's so many white cars. And then if the next day I tell you to look at red cars, you're going to be like, where the hell did all these red cars come from? It's
Yep.
just whatever you focus on. So I think
Yep.
that's a really powerful, interesting. But
Well,
you,
and
what, yeah, go ahead.
well, that's why gratitude is so important. That's why
Mm,
gratitude, I would say gratitude is the easiest path to changing your entire perspective and worldview.
yeah,
And because it's your psyche, you can only focus. So like you only have like this is your little bar. So every day you got a little energy bar. Are you
yeah,
protecting your energy? Are you being good with your time? Are you making the best use of your time while you have a lot of energy?
yeah,
And so it applies with your psyche as well. Your brain can only focus on so many things at once. Like it can't focus on every car color. It can't focus on every single task you have to do. Like it can't focus on all that. You only got so much of this to go through the day. And so gratitude is the quickest way to changing your entire life lens,
yeah.
because gratitude, like the more you submerge yourself in gratitude, the more the gratitude seeps down into your traumas, the more it seeps down into your failures. Like a lot of people, myself included, one of my past struggles was exactly that. And as soon as I started to look for the small things, then that started to ooze into other facets of my life, including traumas, including, failures. And then you start to
Mm,
see like, oh, I am who I am today because of that. That was
mm,
really bad back then, but now I wouldn't have this current equation had I not had that. That bad thing that happened is the reason that today I now do A, B, and C.
mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, finding the small things, and then it's like right now I'm looking for a pretty controversial, just being straightforward way to frame my story. And it's because I'm a rape baby. So it's like part of something, the struggle that I had to fight through is like my birth ruined this woman's life. My birth dad committed suicide after I was born. And then for 4 years, my birth mom committed the same cycles of abuse. So it's all she knew. And she was abandoned. The baby dad killed himself. And then she had another baby with another older man. And then DCFS in Utah took me away.
Mm-hmm.
And like the more you learn about the story, it's like, oh, wow, like if I hadn't been here, then she wouldn't have been abused. So the only way for me to be on this earth is for her to have been abused. Take it a step deeper on another thing, it's like, oh, wow, abortions were illegal in 1990. They looked into an abortion in Utah because it was by rape and she was 13, but it was illegal. So I'm like, oh, wow, I have to be grateful. So if abortions weren't illegal and if my
Yeah.
mom hadn't been raped, I wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. Well, dude, it's just it's interesting, man. First of all, like crazy story. Like, thank you for sharing that. I know you've taken some time to process it, but that's a heavy story. But
Yeah.
it also points out sometimes my wife says this all the time, but sometimes it takes those extreme things for people to step into context. Because like I have that tattooed on my arm, right, which is amor fati, which is the love of fate. Like you can't change it, and you're here, so you might as well, like, you know what I mean? Like it's not your fault, but it's still your responsibility, like that type of mindset.
Oh
Where
yeah.
like, and sometimes you don't have all the answers, and you're just like, dude, we're here. And sometimes the context doesn't even help. I was on the phone with my therapist yesterday. And I'm like, it's like context helps sometimes, but sometimes you just got to be like, dude, we're in this shithole. Like, we've got to get out. Like, doesn't really matter how we can figure out how we got here later. Like, we just got to get out of here and change our lives for the better. You know what I mean? Right now, today.
Heck yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
No, 100%.
Yeah, dude. Well, dude, how have you, by the way, I think I've noticed this about your content. I've noticed this about my content, but the story is the one that always seems to attract the ideal client. It always seems to attract the right people in your life. So the story really does matter quite a bit. The one that we share and the one that we develop in our minds.
Well, it's obviously important for your subconscious because your subconscious is going to continue to validate. So that's why when you talked about your favorite book, the one that comes to my mind is the 4 Agreements. So one of the agreements is don't take things personally. Like, if you can learn to not take things personally and understand that everything someone does is an externalization of their internal self, then in the process too, you understand that everything you do is an externalization of your internals. So now you're learning on both ends. You're learning through other people, and then you're learning through yourself once you really understand that, like, innate human function. It's literally how we function. So it's like the story you tell yourself is very important as well. And if you go to the root of it, you're going to find that the reason you think you're dumb is because when you were a kid, someone called you stupid. Your parents called you stupid. Your teacher called you stupid. Your friends called you stupid. You got bullied. And then you have to unwind those now that you're mature and you're old enough, and you understand that, those are external identities implanted into a very malleable and gullible child's mind. And then so the way I look at it too is like with our stories is 0 to 18, the world creates our story because we're victims of circumstance. We're victims of environment. We don't have that control. But as soon as you turn 18, now your job is to go and undo everything that you just experienced over the last 18 years so you can actually find your identity, not the one that your innate human malleable mind created for itself. And I think that's where most people get caught up on. It's because they never do that, but they're also not aware of doing that. And so, like, the story of that you tell of your story, for example, Tesla, the reason Tesla gained above average, value is because of the story behind it. And so for its industry, the problem it's solving, the social impact, the person who's behind it, everything that they've done, all of that compounded together, and it created something that was a little bit more than just a brand. It was like a movement. It's like a better world. So there's more oomph to it. And so for all of us in our business, our stories, number one, people are scared to be raw and real. So it helps you stand out, and it helps you, because the thing about it is the one thing all humans have in common is suffering. Another thing we have in common is pain. Another thing we have in common is we all drink water. You got to have some sort of water at some point, but everything else after that isn't going to overlap. And so for me personally, like, sharing your story, number one, it helps you heal. So that's probably the most important thing. It's actually the most selfish thing you can do is share your story. It's the most selflessly selfish thing that you can do because it helps on both ends.
Yeah.
If people can see themselves in you, and that unlocks something in their mind that allows them to break through current limiting beliefs, current limitations, current identities that they haven't uncovered from their childhood years and stuff like that. You're transforming other people. You're adding perspective, introspective in their minds. You're forcing them to think a little bit more. Right. And then at the same time, you're facing instead of avoiding, and you're learning how to control the narrative as well. Like the 20th time you tell your story, you're probably going to have more empowerment in the outcome than you did the first time that you told the story. And so the first time to the 100th time is probably going to start more like poor me. And then by the time you get to the 20th, the 40th, the 50th, the 100th, then it's more like, okay, this is who I became because of this story. Yeah, and so there's a transformation that comes from telling your story, because every time you tell it, your brain is going to kick off different things. And every time you tell it, you're going to get more insight from other people. You're going to how they respond, how they react, the story that they share in some way that has some sort of a commonality. Or that person, you know, when I got baptized, they did this little video, and it just talked about me meeting my birth mom. It changed my life. All that, literally my whole
Yeah, I've
world
seen that
perspective
video. Yeah.
got turned upside down.
Yeah.
And a man came to me after and came crying, sobbing in tears. And he's like, I've been looking for my mom for 40 years and I never found her. I haven't been able to find her. And he's like, thank you so much for telling me your story, or for sharing your story. And he's like, what was it like to meet her? And so I don't know what that moment had on that man's life, but in that moment, by having shared that important, pivotal, you know, life-turning piece of my story, I brought emotions out in someone else. And when people are in an emotional state, there's a little bit more movement that can happen. That's why all marketing is emotions, right?
Yeah.
Emotions cause movement. You can't even quantify the impact that your story has on other people. And so in building a brand, it helps you stand out. You know, for me, for example, when people work with me, I'm just like, wow, like you're like part of a movement. Like, you know my story, you know what I'm overcoming, what I have overcome. You're working with me. Most people don't work with me because of what I do. They work with me because of who I am, and they make it fit into what I do. And so I'm just saying, like, a sales call, when someone knows your story, has 70% less resistance than a cold sales call. And they're almost like, you know, where can I pay? What are we even doing? I don't even know yet, but where can I pay? And they're like, they'll say, like, I feel like I already know you. So the like, know, and trust has already been diminished. And it's no coincidence that the most affluent, you know, people in business, in most cases, they also have a really big social following that's correlated to it. So that's not like definitive, but I'm just saying, once, you know, how do I say this? I know Alex Hormozi. Right. I know this person, this person, this person, this person. If they ever come out with something that I feel is good for me, I'll buy it because I already have the like, know, and trust of the person. Yeah, and so
of course.
There's just a lot of power in people knowing and connecting.
Well, I've had that experience when, like, I post things on Facebook. I've had that experience when I'm in a sales job and my podcast has nothing to do with my current, like, gig, and you know, they'll be like, oh my gosh, dude, like, I know you, like, you're on that thinking project thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. They're like, dude, I just heard you talk or whatever. And yeah, sales calls go much better. Like, I pretty rarely lose those calls, especially if it's like relevant, right? Like, I'm not talking about like people buy just for no reason. Like, obviously we're in the right, you know, context and setting and stuff, but it does help. Like, people don't realize, like, you know, knowing that and being out there and being aware, like, of who you are, does help. I like what you mentioned about, you know, I wrote that down. Just like, it helps others with their mindset. It helps others, like, break through. Because people have to see it to, like, do it. You know what I mean? Like, part of learning is, like, I think a key part of learning is watching somebody else do the thing, and then that kind of helps your mindset. So sales is like a good example of this. Like, I had two friends I was helping coach sales, and I was like, you know, and they were doing a specific sale, and I was like, have you ever seen someone close a deal? Like, besides you or your friend, like, have you guys ever seen someone close a deal, like a hard deal? And they're like, no. I'm like, oh dude, it's hard to get into sales if you know what I mean? If you've never seen somebody, like, I remember learning sales, that I caught the itch when I saw a buddy of mine go sell something and got a big commission. And I was like, that's it? That's what they're talking about? Right? You know what I mean? Like, all the books that I had read and all the training, like, got materialized into this short little interaction. And I was like, oh, that's what it means. And you're like, shit, all right, I can do that. Right? And then your mindset changes and you're like, oh dude, I got it. Right? I caught the vision. You know?
Well, and what's important with that too is, however you want to label it, law of attraction. Like, you can't just attract anything. And how do they say this? One of my hardest lessons is, you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are.
Yeah.
And so as your mindset evolves and you start to surround yourself with new people, better people that are matching where your new mindset is, because part of mindset is also trimming the fat that you left to leave behind you, because your mindset has controlled your environment. It's controlled your friends, or they're controlling it. Like, so like you're attracting because
Mm-hmm.
like minds like to be around each other. You know, misery loves company, and so does success. Success loves company just as much as misery loves company. And your
Yeah.
mindset is going to dictate what it is you're attracting. And so like the best way to really like measure your mindset is to look at the people around you and the people you interact with and reverse engineer them. And that will give you a very clear reflection of where you're at, because they're basically mirrors and externalizations of
Yeah.
how you feel about yourself, how you feel about life, all sorts of different things. So your
Yeah.
entire, how do I say this? Your trajectory of social attraction will start to evolve as your mindset evolves.
Yeah.
And you're going to stop putting up with less. So if part of your mindset problem has been negativity, negative self-talk, just negative gossip, stuff like that, if you're going to, the moment you change that and you notice that, you're going to have to trim, because there's a really high probability that other people in your life do those things right now. And
Yeah.
so every level up in life on mindset requires you to trim the fat. And so some people will rise with you, most people won't rise with you. And
Yeah.
that's probably one of the hardest things. And I learned that in addiction, and then I got educated on it, and I'm like, oh, this all makes sense. And so that's another thing about mindset that people don't really take into account, is like changing your mindset will change your entire reality, because it changes the equation of people, opportunities, places, things
Well,
that
yeah,
come
stuff you have
into
to
your
do.
sphere.
Yeah, stuff you have to do, right? Like when you stop making excuses, like new possibilities open up and you start figuring
Yes.
it out, you know, like a good mindset is a problem solving mindset, right? It's like it's accountability and problem solving. I think those two are like really important, because I think the worst people to hang around with are the people who just make excuses. Like I know that shit is hard. Like, you know, when I'm doing this with companies and I'm working on their sales plan, and we first of all, like, sales is data driven. It has to be, right? Like we have to look at real numbers and make decisions off of like what the real picture is based on the data. And you know, I'll be like, okay, now we have the data, let's plug it in. Like the math of sales is very simple. You know, we'll plug it into the math of sales sheet, and I go, okay, well, if you want to hit that goal, we need X amount. And if the first thing they say is like, no way, man, no, 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 and I'm like, okay, look, listen, dude, like that's a mindset thing. But I have some people look at that and they see a really big number and they're like, okay, well, we could probably do this, and I think we can do that, and that just means we need to do this better. And you're like, boom, you're already there. You're gonna hit it, right? Like we just
That,
don't.
that's
But
such that's such a valid point. And I think what's even more important with that is building the temperament to be able to constantly look at yourself and accept these different deficiencies. Because it's like, how do I say this?
yeah,
No, but Rome wasn't built in a day. You weren't built in a day. I wasn't built in a day. And it's almost like these little seasons and these different phases and these different lessons. Like you
yeah,
can't realistically, like the reason a lot of people fail on changing habits is because they try to change 10 habits at once.
sure,
And the best thing that I ever heard is willpower coins. Is you only have so many coins to use at a time.
yes,
And so you can't, if you have 10 deficits, if you try to fix all 10, you will fail. You will fail. That's like, to my understanding, that's one of the main reasons most people fail changing habits, is because they try to go too overboard. That's why Atomic Habits is such a powerful
yeah.
book,
It's a good book.
because
I like that. Yeah,
it talks about, you know, taking little chunks off at a time, not trying to build, you know, Rome in a single day.
yeah,
And so that's such a valid thing, because I don't know where you're at in life. I just know that constantly myself, it's like as soon as you think you've come over, you've like overcome a specific, you know, barrier or limiting belief or obstacle, whatever
yeah,
it is, something new
yeah,
is going to reveal itself. And you're going to find out a lot of the times that when you take this in a different context, there's actually some gaps over here that you had missed. And so you have to always be willing to go, in the sense, might backwards, but the backwards is the forwards.
yeah,
And so it's like making excuses. Like you start with, for example, the gym, and you're like, I have no excuses. I'm going to go to the gym every single day.
yeah,
But that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to make any excuses anywhere else. And
sure,
so it's like you start here, you build the resilience and the consistency, and
mm,
you build the momentum and you build the courage, and then it starts to overflow into other things. You're going to find out, like, just because you have discipline here doesn't mean you have discipline here. just
Yeah.
because you're good at work, but then you go and you order, the McDonald's and the Burger King and the processed foods and all the stuff that we know isn't good and wasn't built for our bodies at all.
Yeah.
Those are both disciplines, but they look
Yeah.
different and they require different, pools of courage to say no to. And so it's like life is going to consistently be a series of those, how do I say this? Like they're internally connect, but they're also
Yeah.
externally connecting to new
Yeah.
things at the same time. And it's
Yeah.
constantly evolving. And if you're not willing to constantly look at yourself and be like, man, I'm not doing good enough. Oh man,
How
So
do
I
you
just
how do
think
you
that's
balance
the
this?
most important.
How do you
What?
balance this, Ty? I'm religious. You know what I am. So use that context as this background, because one of the things that I try to push people away from, especially in like a religious context, is this idea of it's not meant to do this, but a lot of people, but it can very easily trickle into this, what I'm about to say. So take this like with the spirit that I'm trying to say it. But a lot of religions, especially Christianity, I'm LDS, right? You can get really caught up in like every day, look at where your faults are and pray and ask God to help you change them. But like you're falling short somewhere. So like ask God where you're falling short. And it just feels like, we were talking about like what you focus on earlier, right? It feels to me like if you do that every day, you're just going to wake up one day and be like, dude, I'm a humongous piece of shit. Right? Like, and how do you balance it? How do you make that a good experience? How do you make it a positive experience? Like you do need to look at the imperfections and be like, all right, here's what I can work on. Here's what I can be better. But like, it just gets bogged down in like this worthiness thing. And it's never really appealed to me. I don't really like that idea, but you tell me.
So when I say that, I don't mean only look at the negatives.
Sure.
But it's just like if I'm looking at a painting and I don't look at the top, quarter of it, turn it into four sections, and I just look at this piece, and this piece, am I actually looking at the painting, or am I selectively looking at the painting?
Yeah.
So I think because I struggle with this, because like the only way to get out of addiction is to focus on the negatives. So it might sound extremely counterintuitive, but for me, I had to look at all the negatives. I had to feel like the biggest piece of on the planet. And I had to look at that so many times. And then I had to feel so many pains attached to that to finally get me to move away from it. And so, obviously that's a little bit different. And I was at some lows, some pretty heavy lows. So maybe it's not like the most, like, how is that the best comparison for everybody?
Yeah.
But now the way to say it, this is where I struggle, because that got me out of addiction. When I'm now in entrepreneurship, business, life, you have to look at the whole picture. So you can't just look at the positives.
Yeah.
You can't just look at the negatives. You have to look at it all. And so it's like taking a daily inventory. So in addiction, we call it taking a daily inventory. And so that's like every day, just being real with yourself. Be like, man, I lied. I lied to my wife on why I was late. I was actually late because of this, when I could have been on time and I wasn't. So it's all those little things accumulated throughout the day. And so you get to choose what that inventory is. So your inventory doesn't always have to be negatives, but it's just so important to be aware of your negatives, because if you're trying to be 1% better every day and you're not willing to give yourself the clarity on what that 1% should be, then I'm just saying, like, how long are you going to ignore those negatives? Maybe there's a subset of the negatives that you just never look at and you just ignore forever. Like they're never going to get better. And so it's like to me, I would say the balance, and this is something I struggle with because that mindset got me out of here, but it's focusing on everything. And so it's not just the negatives, it's not just the positives, but it's like, how do you be disgusted with yourself? Yet also proud of yourself at the same time. But it's like Andy Elliott. Andy Elliott, for example, he goes up and he yells at people, "You fat slob, take your shirt off, you fat slob. Are you okay being a fat slob?" No, I'm not okay being a fat slob. Sometimes you just got to be called a fat slob, And so, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying this is.
I think you hit, but I think you answered my question, which is, whenever I've asked that question, I think people only look at that. And what you said was really good, which was look at the whole picture. Like you're going to see imperfections, but you're going to see really good things. And I need you to, and then of course it's the Stoic mindset of like, I need you to not take either of those too seriously. And then just pick what you want to work on today. But you need to look at the whole picture. So, I mean, that's a good point, because I do that in sales, right? It's like, yeah, we messed up here, but we're doing really good here. So here's what we need to keep doing. Here's what we need to work on. And then we're just going to fix this, right? We're just going to plug this hole in the ship today. And then we'll just keep going. So I think you answered it. I think it's detrimental when you only focus on the negatives and you don't look at the full picture. You don't give yourself grace, right? Because you did really good here, but you sucked here. And by the way, listen, I like that mindset of like, sometimes you do, especially men, right? Sometimes men just need a good kick in the ass, dude. You just need to be like, look, man, there's no way to sugarcoat this. I know you're trying really hard, but you're stuck in this rut, and this is why, and boom, right? And what you said too
100%.
reminded me of something I heard Grant Cardone say a long time ago, which he was talking about money. And he's like, if you don't have enough money in your bank account, he said, I want you to look at your bank account every day. And he's like, I want you to look at it every day, even if it's in the negative. I want you to look at it every day until you get sick of it. Look at it every day until you decide, right? He's like, look at it every day until you decide that you're going to change something. And, and he said something crazy after that, but I took it as like, change something, like go get a job. Like, you don't have to be an entrepreneur. Like, go work on something, go do something, like look at it every day until you get sick of it. And, just in that instance, by the way, this is kind of why I hate podcasts, because everybody takes these clips and they just like go all crazy. But I'm like, no, in this specific case, it really helped me. It really helped me personally to like look at it and be like, oh my gosh, dude, what am I doing, man? I can go fix something.
yeah.
And when the wheels start turning, you just start fixing problems. And it was good for me. It was a good exercise for me. I really enjoyed it. It helped me a lot.
Oh yeah. Well, and then moving forward, so then once you get past that, now you look back and you're like, whew, I'm grateful that my bank account was at those numbers, because now they're not at those numbers. And so that's another part of mindset is how do I say this? Every bad experience in life is a reflection of areas that we need to improve on.
Well,
and so the only way is pain. Like, pain is actually one of like the greatest gifts in life. And it's funny because you look at like the crucifixion and stuff like that. It's what is it? It's in pain. I'm getting nails in your hand. That's gonna hurt.
There's a difference between pain and suffering.
Yeah.
So I like to study other religions, and Buddhism is the one that taught me this one, right? Which is like, there's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the story of what actually happened. Suffering is the story you told yourself about what happened.
Yes. That's good.
So pain is fine. Like, pain is growth, and it's good, and it's an indicator, right? Like, so there was a really cool book I read. Johann Hari wrote it. I can't remember, but he said he told about this experience, and he got sick in another country. He ate something in another country, got really sick, and he went to the doctor, and he was feeling really nauseous, like throwing up, feeling really nauseous. And he was like, hey, can you give me something for the nausea? And the doctor said, no, I can't, because that's a symptom. Like, your nausea is telling me what's happening. And so if I get rid of it, I won't be like, he was approaching it from like a holistic view. And he was like, no, if I get rid of that, I won't know what's wrong with you. And so and then he took that story and expanded on it. But I was like, yeah, dude, like it's a good thing to like look at when you're trying to solve a problem, is like, where's all the pain? But then pain sometimes isn't a choice. Sometimes we get hurt because of other people, and there's nothing we can do about it. But suffering is always our choice. It's like, and usually lasts longer than pain does.
I like that, because when you look at like, when I think about like Justice Impacted and stuff like that, and I think of like all the psychological warfare that happens, and like how do you get 77% of people to come back? Well, there's a lot of manipulative psychological tactics in that process,
shame and guilt,
and ostracization from society, negated value in society, all sorts of different things. And so the story that we tell ourselves can literally be the difference between 77% coming back and like 30% coming back. And
Yeah.
so that's how powerful, because the reason that I'm not back is because of those stories, but the opportunities, but then the people, investing belief into me,
Right. There's
and
people.
then
Yeah. So I had this conversation. I've been doing this new, it's called the mindset hour, right? Of like where we go on the thinking project and we just talk about your mindset. But I've noticed this pattern because I ask people what the biggest mindset trap is. So let me ask you that, and then let's have that conversation. For
I'll tell
you,
you,
what's
biggest mindset.
yeah? Go trap the
Thinking you're
trap.
better than anybody. Thinking you're smarter than anybody. I think that is the number one mind trap, and that is the
Yeah.
ultimate demise of anybody who's ever achieved anything. And speaking for myself, the thing about it is you're not better than anybody. You have different skills, you have different experiences, and you have different starting points.
Yeah.
And so if I think that right there, because like I'm speaking with someone right now who's like a 5 versions earlier of me, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I see so much of myself in you. I just want to smack you. I just
Yeah.
want to smack you and tell you I can save you years of suffering right now by not doing these certain things. The
Yeah.
journey out of those can be very tumultuous and very painful. And
Yeah. But there is
so
something to
that
be. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, so that for me right there, there's a difference between confidence and ego. And obviously,
Yeah.
everyone who's uber successful has a dipstick of ego, because ego is actually like in moderation. It's good to have a little bit of ego. You need to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but there's a difference. That's when the competitors overtake you. Is when you think you're smarter than everybody. When you stop working, relying on people, because you can't be the master of all trades. You can
Yeah.
only be so good in so many things. So the moment that you start thinking that like you're smarter, and I'm speaking like from personal experience. The
Yeah.
moment you start thinking you're smarter than everybody, when many people are more successful than you are. So obviously there's something there. You're also the smartest
Yeah.
person in the world.
Yeah.
I think that's when it starts to seep into other different things, and then I think that's where
Yeah.
like the hidden ego starts
Well,
to
that's funny because
maliciously grow.
that concept fits perfectly into the word that I've because everybody's said it differently, but the word that I've always come back to is isolation. Like, so if you think you're better than everybody else, you're isolated. You might be isolated on a mountaintop, right? Versus somebody who's isolated in a valley. But like you're by yourself. There's no context. It's like once you get out there. But I also think that, when I talk to business owners who start business, I'm like, there is something really, there is one common thread. And that is they realized that they weren't smarter than anybody. They looked at somebody who was successful and was like, no, we're that, like, he puts his pants on one leg at a time, just like me. Why the hell can't I do this? You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing special about him. There's nothing special about me. And that evens the playing field. And that means that I can go get it. Right. Like, I'm not better than anybody and he's not better than me. So, like, it's almost like permission. Once you like kind of level the playing field and just realize everybody's kind of dealing with their own shit, you get this opportunity to be like, oh yeah, wait, I can do it. Like, Ty did it. I can do it. I can figure something out. Maybe I don't do exactly that, right? Like, I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm not going to go create the next Apple, but I can go create something meaningful for my life and find purpose in my life because somebody else did it, right?
Heck
So
yeah, no,
yeah,
100%.
isolation is that word that I always come back to on a mindset trap. Is like, you just block everyone out and you're like, no, dude, nobody understands me, or like I'm better than everybody, or this or that. And it's like, on a world, 8 billion people alive today, trillions over the lifetime of Earth, and you're trying to convince me that this has only happened to you ever. You're the first, you know what I mean? It's just like, no, dude, it's not true. Like, we can figure this out.
100%.
Yeah.
And isolation's a toughy one, man, because like I travel the world, and so
Hmm.
like, and then that's where sociology comes into play. Like you become those you surround yourself with, so you
Yeah.
have to protect your energy.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why the digital world now is so valuable and important. It's because you can protect your energy from a distance. You can find those relationships.
Yeah.
I think partnerships, especially, you're big on that kind of stuff, right?
I love partnerships, man. I think that's a
Yeah.
great one. Yeah. I think, but I really do. I like what you said there too. I think confidence is great. I think confidence though includes a healthy dose of like humility, right? And
Yeah.
meek. meekness. So when Jesus gave his Sermon on the Mount and he talked about the meek shall inherit the earth, meek means, Jordan Peterson gave the best definition that I've ever heard, which was like having a sword and keeping it sheathed. Right? Like it's better to be like a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Yeah.
And so that kind of meekness. So, but there's a humility, right? Like there's a sense of humility in that kind of area where it's like, I can, but I don't need to. Like I can help people. We don't need to do it this way. But there's a lot of ways we can work on things, and I love that. But confidence comes from that, like knowing that you'll be okay. Like nothing will happen. I wrote that story the other day of like being on a podcast and being like, hey, if my boss fired me, I'd have a job before I let go. And then like the next day I got fired. Well, I got let go. I was part of a mass layoff. And it was so funny because like I was like, oh, this is God. Like sometimes he does have like a crazy sense of humor. It ended up being fine. But I
has it turned out good for you being fired?
Yeah, dude, it's great. I've been laid off. I've been part of 2 layoffs before. No, 3 layoffs. And then I was fired from one sales job. Like my second sales job I was fired from. But it all works out, dude. And here's the thing, you were talking about this earlier. I take it one step further. I get a little more Eastern philosophy on this idea, which is like, and maybe Stoic is also, like there's no good and bad, dude. That's an arbitrary label that you decided to put on it. I don't know if this is like something happens today. I don't know if it's good or bad. I have no clue. Like I don't know what that transitions to later. I don't know what that means for me. Like I don't know, man.
In Hebrew, I don't know if this is true, but I saw it in a short form video, so it must be true, right? It must be true. I saw it in a short form video. It must be true.
Yeah.
But in Hebrew, there's no word for tragedy. There's no word for tragedy in Hebrew because there is no such thing as a tragedy. It's just like the whole thing where like death is a new beginning. So when something falls, something rises in its place, type of a thing.
Yeah.
And so it's just like when the old you dies, the new you is born. Yeah. And so I don't know if that's true. We should fact check it. But if I'm assuming it's, I saw in a short form video. It must be true.
It must be true.
Right? It's a good way. It's a good perspective for life as well. So like if you look at life, like there is no tragedy. Life works for me, not against me. If something is happening for me, but it doesn't feel like it's happening for me, what are those, unseen inferences? What are those deficits of mine? How did I get myself in that situation? More importantly, what is this pushing me towards? So like when I hear on LinkedIn, for example, I've seen so many people get fired. Like I will never work a 9 to 5 because I just see how disposable employees are. Like you are so disposable, like you just don't matter. Mm-hmm. But I look at it and I see a lot of people have a good perspective, good mind. And then you'll see a lot of people that will jump off into their own thing. And then that one thing they jumped off into takes off and they do good. They're happier. They're where they wanted to be before they got fired. They just didn't have the courage to take it. So it's just like, there are things that you really can't quantify the positive impacts that come from things not working out.
I remember the very first time I got laid off. And it was the story that I told. It was that same story. It was like the day before I told that on a podcast. And that day I got laid off. And I remember reflecting back on that and meditating on that experience and thinking to myself, like, I probably would have never left that job. Like, it was it was easy for me to sell. It was like crazy good money. I didn't really like the energy that was there, but it was kind of like golden handcuffs, right? But I remember kind of reflecting in my personal journal, like I probably would have never left. And so if I wouldn't have gotten laid off, I would have never been able to do some of the things that I ended up doing. And so for me, that was a very good experience. Like it ended up being a net positive in my life. And so, yeah, by the way, tragedy is a word in English that carries a lot of like, has a lot of emotion to it. There's a Hebrew word for like disaster or catastrophe, right? But tragedy is one of those things. It's a label, right? It's like it's a calamity that we think is like super bad, right? Because yeah, there's no, like, you just don't label it like that. We don't need to do, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you got fired. It's a horrible thing. I don't know. What if, you know, you got fired and you sent a text to your homie and he was like, oh, dude, that's crazy. Cause you know what I mean? There's so many things that could happen. Or man, sometimes you get fired and you can't find a job for a year. Like, I know people like that, right? I don't know what that means, right? Like, I don't know. I'm not in a position to tell other people how to think about that. But if it were me, you've got to figure out why. You've got to figure out how to push through that and like lean into it and use that as momentum, right? Like, I love that Stoic thought of like, what's fuel for the like what's thrown into the fire is fuel for the fire. Like, what ends up getting burned makes the fire more powerful, right? Like, all of these things and every experience we have, like, if we're the fire, everything we have that gets thrown onto us is fuel to make us brighter and powerful and more capable, right? And more dangerous and more useful and all those things, right? Like, because a big fire can be very powerful, or it can be really dangerous.
And look at it this way too: is the more fires that you go into, the more confidence you build into the next fire.
Oh, dude, yeah. Like, I got laid off. I was on a team last year. Everybody got laid off, and I was like, they came to the middle of the room, and I think I was the only one who'd ever been in this position. But it, you know, there's like 10 of us in there, and the president comes in and he's like, hey, everybody, like, we're letting everyone go. And I was like, I looked around and everybody's kind of shocked and like taking, you know, they're like hyper, you know, and I'm just like, sounds good. All right, I'll put all my stuff up. See you later. Like, went outside, called my buddy. I was like, hey, dude, I'm a free agent. He's like, all right, dude, let's go. And I'm like, oh, sweet. And everybody's freaking out. And I'm like, oh, yeah, dude, I've been here before. I know what to do. Like, it was fun. I was like,
yes.
Like, he goes, I go, dude, I'm a free agent. He's like, let's go. I'm like, I'm gonna take 2 weeks off and then I'll call you. Call them back.
Yeah, you're like, I'm in this and that. I'm taking a couple for myself.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to Disneyland, but I'll come work for you. Yeah, I'll come work with you after that. He's like, all right, deal. So got laid off, went to Disneyland, came back to a job. But you know, it's like
that in life and business, you know, once you go through something, but it also shows you how to recalibrate the next time, you know?
Yeah, it's like, well, I'm not gonna this is a freebie, dude. This is like an opportunity. And
you're almost steps ahead of the problem. Once you were aware of the problem, your mind's already like, okay, this and this and this and this and this.
We know the game.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of power in that. I mean, think about it too. Like Donald Trump, you know, to my understanding, billionaire, bankrupt, billionaire. When he went bankrupt, minus 900 million, he's probably like, okay, I need to do this, and this. Well, what did he do? He did it.
Yeah, you never start over from zero. You know what I mean? Yeah. People ask that question. They're like, what would you do if you had to start over from zero? It's like, dude, I never start over from zero. Like if I again, like if you lose a job, like in my position right now, if I lose a client, like I'm not starting from zero. I've got experience and I've got experience and I've got confidence and I've got all of this knowledge that I can just go do the same thing. Like, what do you mean starting from zero? I'll just make a couple phone calls and we're fine. You know what I mean? Like 100%. It's work, it's hard, but like for you, dude, I've seen you kind of go through a transition in your business. This is interesting. Maybe we can end here for just a second, but like, you know, you have a great business idea and it's your baby, and then you work it for a year or two, and you're like, dude, never mind. Like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yep.
Like, how do you work through that mindset?
Like that's my biggest thing right now. How do I say this? I now understand. Last year, I was so focused on breaking like financial, like economic milestones, and in doing so, I did a lot of things wrong, and my outcome was not where I wanted to be. You know, so like it didn't feel as good as I thought it would be, based on the amounts of effort and time and like momentum into this specific direction. And so like, how do I say this? If I have to do what I do now for the next 5 years, my mental health is going to deteriorate.
Well, you noticed it, right?
Yeah, it is going to get destroyed. And so the like, how do I say this? It's interesting how you can win and lose at the same time. And the way you lost is never how you would have perceived it. And then the way you win is not what you even expected. So like life is completely unexpected. And within every win and every loss, like you learn. So like you talked about it when you said like, oh, I know I'm gonna go do this, this, and this. Like you are accumulating experience and life lessons. And that's why everybody's journey is different as well, is because the life lessons you need to learn are going to be different from the life lessons they need to learn, because you're in different starting points. So you have different deficits and different strengths, and you have different accesses, and you have different circles, you have different leverages. And so that's why like I love like God knows your heart and directs your steps. And so for me, that's my biggest thing right now is like how do I say this? You create your reality, and you have to, just like you talked about before, it's like after you go into the fire so many times, it's like I've told this to God many times. I'm like, if I lost everything and I was homeless, like I've been homeless so many times, I'm not even worried about figuring it out. I'm literally not worried. Like I could be homeless tomorrow and I'll figure it out because I've done it many times.
Dude, listen. I think this is one of the reasons why so many successful people have a very similar story of like coming from poverty or like living in poverty. Because listen, what's scarier than realizing how much $1 million can buy you is realizing how happy you can be on $20,000 a year. That's why, I mean, you lose everything when you do that. Like I grew up, my hometown, I've said this a million times, my hometown, the average salary today is $30,000 a year. And I know very happy people out there. And it's like, I don't need all this shit to be happy. I don't need this to work to be happy. Like my kids don't know the difference between $30,000 a year and daddy making $150,000 a year. They just want me, which means shit, dude. I've got nothing to lose. What's that show where he's like, sure, I'll lose everything, but then I'll have nothing to lose. And it's like, that's a scary dude, you know, like Bane is one of the coolest villains. Cause he's like, you remember when Batman turns off the lights and he's like, you think darkness is your ally? He's like, I was born in the darkness. He's like, I was born in the darkness. And then he does that badass quote. He's like, I didn't see the light until I was a man. And by that time it was blinding. Right. And it's like, it's this thing of like, I don't need that. What are you talking about, dude? Like you're in my, and just turning every situation in your life into your home field. Like this is my home field. Like, what do you mean, dude? You're going to go poor. You're going to be poor. I've already been poor, dude. It's fine. It's not that big of a deal. It's actually, you know what I mean? Like, and not to like discount people's experience of being poor. And like, obviously I've got a lot now. And, but I think there is something about that. That's just like, dude, I know, like but I can eat ramen 3 meals a day. But first of all, I'm Polynesian. I don't know how to make it good, but like, you're going to eat are you okay with eating ramen 3 times a day? You're like, dude, ramen's great. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's fine.
Oh yeah,
dude. I don't know what you do. There's nothing scary. That's what I think is so crazy about having a good mindset is like, and having experiences like, dude, there's nothing scary. It's like, go make cold calls. What if somebody slams their phone in my face? I don't know. You just dial the next number. What are you talking about, dude? Like, you're not dead, man. I don't know. I think there's so many things like when you're not scared of failing. And by the way, which is one of the reasons why I don't believe like failure exists, like winning and losing does, but I don't know if failure does. Because once you're free of like, because everybody asked that question, right? Like, Ty, what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? If you knew failure didn't exist, what would you do? And then people answer it. You're like, well, shit. What if I told you that it didn't exist? What if you just did it? I don't know. I'd do this. Well, dude, we have the internet now. There's an ass for every seat. If you want to play Dungeons and Dragons with your homies till you're 50, there's many people who make really good money doing that.
Yeah.
Shit, all right, dude. Like, sign off then, bro. I get it.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? That's real, dude. It's crazy.
Well, money is in abundance, and I think that's the number one thing that people have to realize. Like, if you just find wild examples of people who have what you don't have. They do less than you do. They have 100 times more than you do, doing a fraction of what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm just saying, you create your reality. And I like what you just said, though, with that question. I know we're coming to an end,
You're good.
but it's like, I think, how do I say this? Yeah, I'm just going through some shapes. Like, I've had some perspective, just like the perspectives have turned upside down lately. And it's
Yeah.
like, what is happiness to me? You know,
Right.
like where is the convergence of happiness, joy, and how do I say this? Like feeling good about what you're building, what you're doing, and the impact that you're having.
Yeah.
How much is what you want, and how much is what the world wants. Like everything has a price.
Mike,
Are we
yeah.
actually willing to pay the price for the visions that we have?
two quotes. Mike Posner, and he was quoting someone else, but I heard it first from Mike Posner. He said, "How many of your goals were made simply because you couldn't sit in a room by yourself in silence?" There's that one. And then, of course, like Nick Saban, he said, "It's not necessarily about what you want," or he said, "It's not necessarily about how bad you want it. It's about what you're willing to do to get it."
Yep.
Because that's and I tell my wrestlers that, like, I coach club wrestling. I tell them that I'm like, dude, I don't care. I don't give a shit how bad you want to win a state championship. If you sit at home every day and you don't come to practice, you ain't gonna do it. Like, you're right. Like what you want is the function of what you're willing to pay to get it. Period.
Yep.
That's why capitalism.
Hard
sucks.
truth. It's just like that's just why it's so important to understand the price is required of whatever it is you're working against or working towards, because that's going to dictate what you're working against, and all the working against is going to be internal.
Yep.
And so, like, obviously there's externals, but it's like, how much are you willing to put into getting to these next levels? How much trimming? How much sacrifice? How many failures can you handle? Yeah. Can you handle the amount of failures for the bigger visions? Like how impactful is a failure? And when I say failure, it's a lesson or a blessing type deal.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, in not succeeding in something, obviously learning and growing through it.
Losing.
And so, like,
dude. Yeah.
A lot of the times we don't take into an account that. That's something that I've had to realize a lot lately. I just want to have a family, man. I want to have a family, make good money, and have good impact. I want to tell my story, have kids. Like I just want to lean more into my story than anything right now. Like, AI is cool, and the people who lean into AI are literally like winning. But like, if we look at the reality of what it's going to do, it's like, I don't even know if I'm morally and ethically aligned with AI anymore, because it's going to destroy and it's going to decimate society. And I am so convinced of the long-term negatives. I think people are being fooled by what's actually going to happen. You think more robots by 2040, and now they're building factories where robots are going to build the robots. So now we're going to have scalability that we've never had before at a price reduction that they've never experienced before. So we're going to see speeds and rapid rates of innovation that we've never seen before. I'm now seeing an uptick in the rate of innovation. So between 2022 and now, technologies and utility value of different technologies is growing at an exponential rate. And the only thing that's saving society right now is the delay between adoption and innovation. I have already assessed that the biggest market opportunity in AI is to focus on closing this gap. So like that's my $1 billion idea right now, is whoever could focus on reducing the time for adoption and focus on literally, hey, who do we need to get in front of? What problems do we need to solve? And how do we need to position ourselves for these people, stakeholders, publicly traded companies? That's a real one. All they care about is money. Fire the people. We just want our return. They don't care. And so like when you get into those and you start getting in front of the leaders and the decision makers, there'll be an increase in AI. So all I'm saying is I just see this decline. And so I almost have like a ethical, like a moral, like obstacle right now with AI stuff, where it's like, crap, like middle class is going to disappear. People, like, I just met a girl yesterday, and it was just over at this little pub and grill, and she was the only white person. And I said, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here? are you visiting or you work here? She's like, oh, I get to stay here for free in just, in exchange for volunteering. I start college in Scotland next year. I said, what are you going for? Oh, I'm going to go be like an editor for like a media outlet. And I'm like, oh, so are you using AI? No, we're not allowed to use it in our classes or anything. I'm like, oh, so they're not even teaching you how to use it. They're just completely restricting it. It's like, yeah, because they don't want us all cheating and doing all these things. And I'm like,
Yeah, that's
have you ever used have you ever used a calculator?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's no different than a calculator. What does a calculator do? It means so you don't have to learn how to do the maths in your head. So AI for all these different use cases is the same thing as a calculator is.
Oh,
And
for
she's
sure.
like, oh, and she doesn't start college till later this year. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking she's moving into a dead end job. And society isn't even going to tell her that the money she invests in her education, useless. The
Yeah.
job that's supposedly going to be there in 4 years when she's done, it's not going to be there for her.
Yeah.
Society isn't even doing the justice of telling society what's happening. They're taking money because the current systems are built on those infrastructure, that
Yeah.
ecosystem. And so,
Well,
like, even society, for its own
yeah.
best interest, is basically setting people up for failure, taking their money in the process, knowing well darn and true that in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, just look at the rates of innovation right now,
Yeah.
and multiply that, and add in the degrees of speed to innovation, and continue to multiply that over the next 6 years.
Yeah. AI.
That is
AI is crazy, dude.
So that's just something. It just blew my mind when she told me that. I'm like, oh man,
That
your
is,
country
yeah,
does not care about
writing,
you.
Writing is crazy. Writing is a crazy one because it's like, oh yeah, we could talk forever on that. But let's do this, Ty. You and me will do this again. But I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you, taking time with me. But tell everybody where they can follow you, all that good stuff.
TY-SHANE space Howell, HOWELL, Facebook, LinkedIn. Give me a follow.
Hell yeah,
Yeah.
dude. Good for you, man. All right, hold on, bro. All right, I don't know if you want to let your thing upload. You can or not. I don't really care, but
okay.
So refresh the page and try again if the problem persists. Yeah, so we didn't go live to LinkedIn for some reason. It like glitched or whatever, but we went live to everywhere else. So